Welcome. My name is Skip Rutherford. I'm Dean of the Clinton School, and we appreciate you being here. Could I ask everyone to turn your cell phones and electronic devices off, please? Welcome to people. I'm glad to see Dr. Michael Moore, the Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of Arkansas System, who is here. Dr. Moore, we're glad to have you, and I'm glad that you're here on a barbecue program. We're not into big academics today. We're into food, which is fun. No, seriously. I want to thank Nancy Green and Rich Cosgrove. Where are you? Where are Nancy and Rich? They were here. There they are, with Whole Hog North Little Rock, the Whole Hog catering operation they do. Not only is their barbecue good, but they are tremendous public servants, and they help a lot of people and a lot of causes. And we couldn't have a barbecue program today without feeding our speakers some whole hog barbecue, and which we just did. So thank you, Nancy and Rick. I believe that Nikolai DePippa runs the best college speaker series in the country. And from a variety of topics, Dr. Moore on academics and other areas, to fun topics like barbecue, he brings in a wide diversity of speakers so that our students, our staff, and the general public can enjoy. To introduce our program is a person who needs no introduction, the director of the Clinton School Speaker Series, Nikolai DePippa.
Thank you, Skip. And this is one of those programs that has been circled on my calendar for a while, and the only mistake that I made was that I did it on a Friday in Lent. And so I've just been smelling this barbecue all morning, and I cannot do anything about it. But I'm not going to waste any of your time talking about our guests today, but environmental anthropologist specializing in ethnoecology, agrobiodiversity studies, sustainable agricultural systems, sustainable development in food and culture, and alternative political ecologies. All that to say, what does that mean? And he told me it's studying the relationships of humans from all times, at all places, and what they do. So one of those things is food, and he has got a Arkansas connection, and he's also going to tell us about that. So please welcome our guest today, Dr. James Veteto.
Well, thanks for having me. I have the unique pleasure of when I give these barbecue talks and they feed me barbecue beforehand, I still have that burn, you know, from the barbecue sauce on my lips. So I'm really in my subject matter today. And it was delicious, by the way. The whole hog barbecue was quite delicious. So yeah, it seems like there are a lot of topics of various serious nature here at the Clinton School, and maybe they wanted a little time off to relax and talk about barbecue and just sort of do something quite not as serious. But I'm here to tell you that barbecue is a very serious subject to Southern minds. I mean, I think it's as important as anything else. So I just want to go ahead and say that to begin with. So yeah, the title of my talk is The Slaw and the Slow Cooked, and this is the book, which is for sale over there after the talk, if you are so inclined. As do many, I come by my love of MidSouth BBQ somewhat honestly. I spent my childhood summers eating smoked pork at family gatherings between my father's family in Lexington, Tennessee, and my mother's kin just down the road in Hot Springs, Arkansas. In addition to my grandpa's delicious smoked ribs and homemade family barbecue sauce, growing up, I was a frequent patron of McClures barbecue in Hot Springs, notably the longtime favorite barbecue joint of a certain former president that is very close to the interest and mission of this school. My uncle also went to high school with President Clinton, and my grandmother worked with his mother at a local Hot Springs hospital. My father was in the Air Force, stationed here in Jacksonville when I was young, and we traveled a lot during the summers, mostly back to the Mid-South from various places we lived to visit family. My dad had a penchant for driving off the main interstates and highways, and he's sitting right over there. throughout the South and finding the most out-of-the-way ramshackle barbecue joints possible. We ate at a lot of colorful places and had a lot of great barbecue in addition to a lot of bad barbecue. This was in the 1980s and before the current age of culinary tourism and finding all the best locavore locations online. It was thus a very hit or miss affair, but filled my childhood memories with smoky, dim-lit barbecue shacks and all manner of flea market decorations and interesting characters. The waitresses were always friendly and the tea was always sweet. This was a wonderful childhood. I'm going to embarrass my dad now because this is a family joke. The only downside was if you had to sit behind his seat driving home from the barbecue restaurant. I'll leave that open to interpretation. Okay, so as I said, the title of my talk, The Slaw and the Slow Cooked, is also the title of the book that I co-edited in 2011 with Ted Macklin, who's not here today, for Vanderbilt University Press. Let me go ahead and let's see if, there we go. It was really a series of happenstance events that led to the book project. Despite my lifelong love of MidSouth BBQ, I'm an environmental anthropologist who has done a lot of work on documenting and conserving heirloom vegetable and fruit varieties throughout the South, in addition to promoting sustainable livelihoods. I did not set out to write a book on MidSouth BBQ, although it was a lifelong passion of mine. The impetus for the book originated in a roundtable discussion on West Tennessee BBQ that Ted and I hosted at the Society for Applied Anthropology annual meeting in Memphis in 2008. We had both attended the previous meeting in Tampa and enjoyed a roundtable lunch discussion on the cultural history of the Cuban sandwich. When we heard that the 2008 meeting was going to be held in Memphis, our minds turned immediately to one thing. Anthropologists from around the world can't visit Memphis without being properly introduced to the city's vibrant barbaculture through the medium of smoky pork ribs, pulled pork sandwiches with slaw on top, fiery tomato-based sauce, and a wide assortment of sides. We called the Rendezvous in Memphis, which many of you I'm sure have been to set up a meeting room and orders of the famous dry rub ribs and Joe York from the Southern Foodways Alliance at the University of Mississippi to show clips and discuss his documentary film on West Tennessee BBQ. That film is called Whole Hog. If you haven't seen that, go to the Southern Foodways Alliance website. It's really fantastic. Ted and I both prepared somewhat off-the-cuff presentations on the history of West Tennessee BBQ and its role in the civil rights movement. The mood of the roundtable was rather relaxed and was as much of an excuse to get family and friends together as anything else. My folks traveled up from Hot Springs and we were all staying at Ted's historic family farm in deep rural West Tennessee. Everyone had a good time, and visitors from various world regions expressed their appreciation and newfound love and loyalty toward Memphis BBQ. I can remember walking back from the Rendezvous to our hotel, and this woman from Eastern Europe was just glowing and telling me how much she loved the barbecue and why she had never tasted this before. And so it was really nice. It was sort of promoting cultural diversity through barbecue. We had no specific plans to pursue the project further other than smoking pork shoulders together for crowds of people at the annual Southern Seed Legacy seed swaps at the University of Georgia, where we were both pursuing doctoral work. As we left Rendezvous that chilly March day, spring, in Memphis, our minds and work turned to other topics. It wasn't another year, it was within the next year that we received a message from Eli Bortz at Vanderbilt University Press. He's the acquisitions editor there. And he asked us if we would be interested in producing a monograph on Tennessee BBQ. He was looking through the conference schedule and saw that we had hosted this roundtable, which was really just kind of an excuse to get a bunch of people together that we loved and appreciated and eat some barbecue. and contacted us. Due to the popularity of regionally focused barbecue books coming out from various university presses and the importance of barbecue to Southern culture and identity, Eli's strategy was to beat University of Tennessee Press to the punch and put out a book on Tennessee barbecue. Ted and I, both deep in dissertation writing on other topics, though related, we didn't think we could muster enough energy to produce a monograph at the time, but we had enough connections to individuals working on Southern food and culture that we thought a collaborative edited volume was a definite possibility. We also modified Eli's proposal to expand our topic to the Mid-South as a whole, though lifelong participants in the West Tennessee and Memphis barbecue traditions. We knew that as you traveled eastward across Tennessee, the barbecue changed and became notably sparser. Once you get to Nashville, right, there's not really that much good barbecue. Sorry to anyone who's from Nashville. You can, fisticuffs later if you can get me later. But anyway, so our barbecue loyalties and tastes more accurately cross state lines with particular reverence for the wonderful barbaculture diversity in the state of Arkansas. Which I'm sure many of you would agree with. You can pat me on the back later for that one. So we recruited a variety of different food writers from inside the academy and out, some of them very well known, John T. Edge from the Southern Foodway Alliance and others. Our intent was to create a book that was both academically rigorous and accessible to popular audiences, so sort of a dual-purpose book. The Slaw and the Slow Cooked was born. I'm going to talk now a little bit about the history. This is going to be the main focus of my talk, is really giving you the context of the history of Mid-South barbecue and the different historical permutations that it's went through. I mean, I've eaten Mid-South barbecue my whole life. My family, we would have barbecue philosophy arguments at the dinner table and all this sort of thing. But really researching this book, I knew it was central to Southern life, but I didn't really know how central it was from the very beginning and how involved in Southern politics it's been. And you could really, you could write a whole book interpreting all of Southern history, probably through the lens of barbecue. I challenge someone to do that. I don't know if it'll be me, but this book gets at that in several dimensions. So beginning with the origin of the term, Gary Nabhan notes in the foreword to our book, the word barbecue itself has interesting and complex etymological origins. The word is derived from the Taino Indians of the Caribbean and their word barbacat, which refers to a framework of sticks set upon posts that was used to skewer and smoke mammalian meats, fish, or fowl. Ooh. All right, there we go. So this is more roasting here, but they also did cook. They burnt down coals and they really did smoke foods. And this really happened all the way up the East Coast of the Americas. So Native Americans were practicing a type of barbecue before Europeans ever got here. By the time the social and culinary tradition of barbecue had reached the Mid-South proper, it was already a 150-year-old American tradition that had originated in Virginia and migrated westward. Actually, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, it really started in Virginia, and they had big barbecues they write about in their journals and have been documented quite well. And so the second chapter in this book by Robert Moss really looks intensely, and I'm taking some material from that, at the history of Mid-South barbecue. Soon after West Tennessee and Arkansas were settled, barbecues became a central component of nearly every aspect of social life. To begin with, they were pretty crude affairs, taking place in shady groves or open fields, using improvised tables and furnishings and whatever utensils were on hand. So these were early settlers coming on wagons, and they didn't have, not that barbecue joints are usually fancy to any extent, except maybe some of the more modern commercial ones. But this sort of rough and tumble, rustic component that a lot of people love about barbecue was there from the very beginning. It was really a common people's food. I call it a proletariat food, although all different social classes enjoy it. Pork, beef, mutton, or whatever wild game was at hand were commonly prepared and eaten. So it just wasn't pork at the beginning. Of course, it isn't still today, but it is for most of the South. Barbecues were features of early militia musters and Independence Day celebrations. For example, in Jackson, Tennessee, in 1822, on the 4th of July, a round of 13 cheers were given following a town-wide barbecue. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, the Grecian Emancipation, not even sure what that is, and the Western District of Tennessee were prominent among the toasts, each of which were followed by salutes from the guns of the Hickory Guards Light Infantry Company. So you had these toasts and the salutes, and it was really kind of a formal affair, but yet rough and tumble. In 1821, a year after Arkansas was created and 15 before it was admitted to statehood, Phillips County, Arkansas held its first 4th of July celebration. Josiah Shin documented the affair, quote, "The Phillips County barbecue was held near a spring in the neighborhood where a fine quality of Kentucky mint had taken hold. Though why the mint patch should be immortalized, I cannot say. There must have been some beverage of very strong parts, though of this the record is silent. Several beeves were roasted whole and served in barbecue style." Mid-South politicians soon after realized that community barbecues were ideal platforms for electioneering. Campaign barbecues became commonplace in the 1830s, a tradition that continues in some form today, and were put on variously by candidates and groups of supporters. Such barbecues were part of the early formation of Southern political parties and became an important forum for political discourse in the South. So you might say the barbecue had a hand in creating this fine institution that we're at today. To provide a local example, in the presidential election of 1840, campaigning for William Henry Harrison, the Tippecanoe Club of Little Rock adopted a resolution to host, quoting from the Arkansas Star, I think a defunct early newspaper, "a free barbecue to the people of Pulaski County and as many from the adjoining counties as can conveniently attend." One could make the argument that Southern politics and barbecue are inseparable. President Clinton reminded us of this symbolically during his presidency, as he had McClures barbecue catered on to Air Force One, those of you who remember, much to the delight of the media and proud Hot Springs residents. Well, the Democrats at least. This isn't the best picture, but this is President Clinton at McClures signing. There's some really nice pictures at McClures restaurant of President Clinton there. If you get the chance to visit, some of you are probably very familiar with it. Barbecue pits at early community and political gatherings were long, shallow trenches dug into the ground. Depending on expected attendance, such pits might be 200 or 300 feet in length and 4 to 6 feet wide. Hickory and oak logs were burned down to coals and spread in the trenches. Whole animal carcasses were run through with green sticks or iron bars and laid across the pit. Slaves frequently performed the hard work of tending the pits. Sauces at the early Mid-South barbecues were much different than they are today and consisted of little more than melted butter, vinegar, a little water, and salt and pepper. So this is an example of this style of pit barbecue that you don't see that much anymore these days, but some people still do practice it. Word about the sauces, yeah, at this point, actually, barbecue sauce in most of America was just about the same. Melted butter, little vinegar, a little salt and pepper. It wasn't until, and I'm going to talk about this, the development of barbecue restaurants in the early 19th century that really the sauce and the regional styles became more distinct. So as I mentioned, early barbecues in the region were rough and tumble affairs featuring arguments, fistfights, and the occasional duel. By the 1850s, the temperance movement had made significant inroads in taming Southern barbecue gatherings, holding what they called cold water barbecues, where all other aspects of barbecue stayed true to form, except for the substitution for whiskey and other inebriants with cold spring water. As drinking and fighting were toned down, increasing numbers of women and children began to attend, and barbecue became a more respectable aspect of the Mid-South civic life. On plantations, barbecue also played a central role in the lives of slaves. When they weren't preparing barbecue for the white masters, black pit masters were renowned for cooking barbecue among their own people. On early Virginia plantations, slaves had more latitude in movement, and barbecues posed as a front for revolts, including Gabriel's Rebellion in 1800 and Nat Turner's Rebellion in 1831. This is a revolutionary tradition that carried over into modern times, as civil rights leaders such as Martin Luther King held planning sessions in barbecue joints and fried chicken restaurants. I actually think this is just a wonderful part of the history of barbecue in the South, that people fighting injustice for civil rights organize some of those activities at barbecues. I think this is something that people don't talk about enough in terms of the history of Southern barbecue. By the time barbecues had reached the Mid-South, whites had clamped down on them with heightened surveillance and rules, but black barbecues continued to be an important and rewarding part of slave life on special occasions such as Christmas or the 4th of July. So these were sanctioned by the plantation owners. So instead of having barbecues almost whenever they wanted, they were toned down to special events. Fiddle music and dancing was a ubiquitous part of such celebrations, and on certain plantations, alcohol and visits from slaves on neighboring plantations were allowed as well. Lewis Hughes, who was raised a slave in Mississippi, recollected being so excited on barbecue days that he could barely do his housework, calling such events a ray of sunlight in their darkened lives. So it was really, and we all are probably aware who live in the Mid-South of the wonderful barbecue tradition that goes across race and class lines, but there's a really nice situated African-American tradition throughout the Mid-South, and this goes all the way back. Before the Civil War, barbecues were adopted for other forms of public gathering and celebration, most prominently send-offs and receptions for soldiers who went off to fight in conflicts such as the Mexican-American War, and to giant rallies hosted by the region's first railroad lines to sign up subscribers for shares. Barbecues were initially used to send off troops to the Civil War as well, but ceased once the social and economic impacts of the conflict escalated. At the end of the war, Southern Democrat politicians tried to use barbecues held for African Americans to gain their votes and reestablish white political power, mostly unsuccessfully, despite the enticement of good smoked pork. Southern whites were more successful, of course, in reasserting their power by using terrorist tactics such as the Ku Klux Klan, in addition to enacting Jim Crow legislation. At the end of the 19th century, as rural Southerners began to move to cities, barbecue took a broader role in all aspects of life, including county fairs, church gatherings, school reunions, and Emancipation Day celebrations in the African American community. As the commercialization of the South proceeded, the rise of restaurants led to the intense regionalization of barbecue styles that we recognize today. Before the late 19th and early 20th centuries, barbecue was very similar throughout the South and also throughout the rest of the country, but as restaurants began experimenting with novel methodologies, particular styles began to develop, and entire cities or regions, such as Memphis and West Tennessee, began to be associated with their barbecue. Beginning in the 1920s forward, as everyday Americans began to have greater access to automobiles, barbecue roadside stands became more prominent. All the operator needed was hickory wood and a pit dug in the ground, not much overhead. Smoked meat was simply wrapped in a brown paper bag or placed between two slices of white bread, so it was very cheap and easy to serve. Proprietors of other roadside businesses, such as gas stations, general stores, or motor lodges, began serving barbecue as a side business as well. Here we have McClures. The legendary barbecue joint just down the road is a primary example of such a phenomenon. The McClures family operated West Side Tourist Court in the 1920s, adding a barbecue pit in 1928 to serve slow-smoked goat, beef, and pork to guests. After a visitor who couldn't afford the $2 debt he owed for his 2-month stay offered up what he called the world's greatest barbecue sauce recipe, the McClures figured getting something was better than nothing. The rest is history. As 4 generations, the McClures have turned that $2 sauce into a barbecue dynasty, serving luminaries from Al Capone to President Clinton and Willie Nelson. Quite a diverse crowd they serve up there. Barbecue became somewhat of a national phenomenon at this time when the automobile became more ubiquitous in American culture, at least along the southern portion of the country, from the southeast all the way out to Southern California during the 1960s, as McDonald'sization of food culture proceeded from the Ford model applied to industrial food production. But it had subsided by the 1970s as restaurant owners realized you couldn't make barbecue in the short amount of time that you could hamburgers. However, in the Mid-South, particularly, the regional barbecue tradition continued unabated. This is exemplified by the African-American communities of Memphis, where, according to Lolis Eric Ely, the well-known New Orleans food writer, particularly in the black sections of the city, barbecue pits are more common than lawn furniture. Many stores also have an old drum smoker chained to a telephone pole out front to advertise that in addition to grits and groceries, they sell barbecue. In the words of Robert Moss, a key contributor that I mentioned earlier to the Slaw and the Slow Cooked, quote, "Barbecue is as essential to the history and culture of the Mid-South as the blues, cotton, and the Mississippi River. From the very beginning, it played a central role in the region's institutions and social traditions, evolving along with local culture to remain relevant to and reflective of the people as a whole. While barbecue itself is a national institution, within the Mid-South region, it has taken on its own unique and increasingly world-famous style. And if history is any indication, that style will continue to flourish and evolve for years to come." So now I want to talk a little bit about what has taken place after the book. So the book's been out for about 2 years, and we've had some pretty interesting developments in terms of our research and our applied work. And actually in the book, there are some Memphis food writers, Paul and Angela Nipple. They've got a couple books out, and they write about barbecue. They compare traditional barbecue to modern commercial barbecue, and they look at it in terms of the scaffolding of the values of the slow food movement. So the slow food movement has sort of 3 tenets. Is food good, clean, and fair? And they go, I won't go through all their argument, but they obviously, Southern barbecue, Mid-South barbecue is good. I can attest to that. I just had some about 20 minutes ago. Is it clean? Well, you know, barbecue, you know, you have to smoke wood, you're releasing emissions. But they argue that in comparison to a lot of the modern practices, that actually on a local scale, traditional barbecue is fairly clean, and it also provided employment to a lot. I mean, people just started barbecue restaurants in their neighborhoods or on the side of roads. So it and pit masters, although you know it's not usually an occupation that's going to get you rich, but people have made some money on it, and so it's been a form of employment in the Mid-South for many years. So looking at that, we sort of, and their conclusion was that the traditional Southern or Mid-South, in this case, barbecue, is really, it is a slow food. It's maybe the original American slow food, and it is, and I invite you to read more about this in their chapter in the book, but it is good, clean, and fair. But when you get into confined animal feed operations that are raising hogs now, it is not. It's not good for labor. It's not good for the environment. It's not good for our health, really. So the idea is that we get back to sort of pasture-raised and finished with various products and sustainably raised hogs, and that we preserve biodiversity through using some endangered animal breeds that have been passed down generation to generation, like the black hog, the mule-foot hog, which is also called, that's also called the Ozark hog. There's a Osaba Island hog. There are these old-time southern varieties that we're losing, and they have very distinct taste. And some places, like at Scott's Parker's in West Tennessee, actually, they have their own special feed, and they buy hogs only from local farmers. But I will say, and they do whole hog barbecue, but that's getting harder to find because the small operators, swine operators, have been pushed out by big agriculture and corporate agriculture. And so we're sort of advocating getting back to that small, and it's happening. You know, people are interested in slow foods and heritage foods and sustainability, and we think that that this could be productively applied to Southern barbecue. So I'm an environmental anthropologist. I'm also a lover of Southern barbecue. I would like to see those two worlds, you know, become more in conversation, at least. Also, I've done a lot of research on heirloom tomatoes. In my family's barbecue sauce, we use it's a Brandywine type called the Rhodes tomato, and it makes a wonderful, wonderful tomato paste that we use in our sauce. It's way better than ketchup. Just outstanding. Here in Arkansas, there's the Bradley Pink is a well-known. This was actually developed by the University of Arkansas in the 50s, but it wins awards all over Arkansas. Delicious. There's the Arkansas Traveler. There are all sorts of different tomatoes, these heirloom tomatoes, so we can preserve genetic diversity, preserve our cultural heritage, and Gary Nabhan actually calls this eater-based conservation. So the idea is that we're enjoying our barbecue, as we always have around these parts, but we're also contributing to biodiversity conservation and to environmental sustainability. So I'll show a couple other slides. Oh, I was supposed to show that one earlier. That's a delicious sandwich from Roadside BBQ just outside of West Memphis, right on I-40 there. Has anybody ever eaten at Roadside? Oh yeah, that's some good stuff, isn't it? Neat little farmer's stand right next to it. Actually, I talked to them. They grow a lot of their own vegetables and stuff that they serve there as well. This is actually Oak Hill Farm, so my co-author, does anybody have time? How am I doing on time? Anyway. Okay. All right, I know we're going to have a question and answer. I'm going to wrap up here real quick. But so this is at Oak Hill Farm, which my co-author, Ted Macklin, runs in West Tennessee. And he slaughtered these hogs. This is actually a big black. And if you've ever seen these, this particular one was named Boris, and it was about a 300 or 400 pound hog. And the defining characteristic of them is their ears flap over their eyes. Has anybody ever seen this type of hog? It's pretty neat. So I guess that's, I don't know, some sort of adaptation to keep the flies out of its eyes or something like that. But they are really distinctive and delicious. And so Ted, so Ted, I mean, we're not just scholars who, this isn't dispassionate work here. So he's working on his farm to maintain these heritage breeds. He cooks them up for benefits for his farm, and he sells shares of it to people as a community-supported agriculture. He's really doing the work, and his family's been there since the 1700s. This is like a century farm that has really been in soybean production for the last several decades, but he's really trying to return it to its smallholder past. And so this is actually a project that I've got going on. It's not in the Mid-South, but it's in southern Appalachia. I have a sustainability institute there. This is an orchard. We have about 100 heirloom fruit trees, including the Arkansas Black. There's just a couple trees down. If you've had that, it's a very delicious Arkansas variety. And we're going to take piglets from Ted, and this is my dog modeling as a hog. Yeah, he's kind of got the look, you know. But we're going to run hogs in the orchard, and this is something I've interviewed. So as an anthropologist, I've interviewed old-time farmers and gardeners all over the Ozarks, all over the Ouachitas, all over southern Appalachia, and particularly in Appalachia. And I'm sure, I haven't talked to anybody specifically about this in the Ozarks, but I'm sure it was a practice too. Appalachia and the Ozarks have a lot of similar cultural and agricultural characteristics, but they would actually run the hogs in the orchard but you have to get non-rooting types or else they'll damage the trees. But there are non-rooting orchard hogs, and you run them in the orchard, and you know, it mows the grass, they provide fertilizer, and at the end of the season, all the drops. So you want to actually, if you're running an orchard, you want to get the drops out. So the apples that have just fallen to the ground, because they can harness disease in them. And so you finish the hogs on that, and hogs finished on apples is just something really nice. And so you can get really particular. See, we've lost that a little bit, I think, in the commercial barbecue culture. I mean, hogs used to be finished on, well, before the chestnut blight, chestnuts, acorns, all sorts of different things that actually give the meat different flavors. So we're going to experiment with this. So us, the co-authors of this, so he'll be raising the heirloom hogs, and I'll pick them up from him, and I'll take them out here and run them in the orchard. And so we're collaborating in different and creative ways. So it's been a really fun project. It's a labor of love. And if you do read the book, I hope you enjoy it. If you have critiques, we all have our embedded opinions about barbecue in the South, right? They say, you know, if you want to stay out of a fight at a cocktail party, right, don't talk about religion or barbecue or what's the third one? Politics, yeah. Maybe college football fourth, but yeah, I've a couple times I've almost inspired people to fisticuffs with barbecue talk. I've learned to be a little more diplomatic, particularly when I'm in barbecue far-off countries such as North Carolina or Texas. Luckily, I'm here in the real barbecue country here today, so I'll leave you with that.
We do have time for some questions, so if you raise your hand, we'll get a microphone to you. Abby in the back.
Thank you for coming. Is it on? I can't really hear it. I'm a second-year student at the Clinton School. My name's Abby, and in college I studied Southern Studies at the University of Mississippi Center for the Study of Southern Culture.
Yep.
I really appreciate your presentation and how you apply it to social good, and that's what we do at the school here. I'm not sure if you've heard of the Pie Lab in someplace in Alabama. Have you heard of that?
What is it?
The Pie Lab.
The Pie Lab?
Philosophy is
wow, that sounds
pie
delicious.
plus conversation equals social change. And the idea is it brings together many different types of people in the community and talk about issues in their community and how they can change that. I wanted to know your opinion. Can food, as a common denominator among many different types of people, can it lead to social change? Do you know of any examples that you can give us?
Well, yeah, I think probably the most prominent example, you know, here in the last couple decades is really the slow food movement that took off in Italy when they tried to build a McDonald's in Rome at a very historic site, and then the founder of the slow food movement organize a protest against it, and from that you have this international movement where people are promoting, they're gathering, they're promoting, and some instances they're protesting, but they're really looking for a socially just, sustainable and environmentally friendly food system. So that's a really good example. I think the examples I gave of organizing during the civil rights movement and slave rebellions are great historical examples from our own region. I think that, I think we all know that if you get together with people over some good food, creative things can happen, and sometimes those things are political, they're activist, I think I really think, and there's some wonderful things going on here in Little Rock and throughout Arkansas. There are seed swaps happening. There are community-supported agriculture, and these are really people focused on creating social change in our food system. So those are just a few examples, but there are a lot, really.
And it's a great question, Abby, on National Pie Day. It's the other pie.
Is it National Pie? Oh.
It's the other pie. It's 3.1 foot, but okay.
Not quite as delicious, though.
No, it does not. No.
Well, in addition to eating a lot of barbecue pork, I ate a lot of barbecue deer growing up. I'm about finished writing a book that has a chapter that has an ancillary. The book has an anti-bullying ancillary thing that has a chapter dealing with a mentor mentoring someone at the barbecue place.
Right.
But the question I've got is, I live about 40 miles north of here. I'm in an area that's a microcosm of a lot of areas that has a lot of wild hog manifestation.
Right.
And how is that impacting some of the barbecue that you've noticed today? Because I know it's with some of your advocacy about certain types of pigs. And I was wondering what kind of effect that's had.
So the feral pigs?
Yeah.
I thought, I almost want to open a barbecue restaurant focusing on cooking feral pigs. I mean, my cousin hunts down in South Arkansas, and he's brought some home, and I've smoked them up, and it's just been delicious. So I think it makes good barbecue. I don't know specifically here in Arkansas, but there are a couple places I know of in Texas that are wild food restaurants, and they do a lot of smoking of feral hogs. And I think you have to get some special permitting to do it. But I think, that's a great solution. I mean, why not? I mean, they're really damaging to the landscape. If you've ever been in a forest where feral pigs have been, it's just like somebody took a tractor and tilled the forest, But I think the more we could use those creatively and in our foodways, that'd be good.
Yes, sir.
Tell me why in the Mid-South there's so much of a prevalence of almost essentially just pork barbecue. You almost have to go to like Kansas City or Texas to get beef barbecue. Why do you think that is?
Well, I will say that is, from my opinion, maybe you've had different experience, but I would say that is definitely true in West Tennessee and Memphis. I haven't eaten a ton here in Little Rock, but I will say that at McClures and there's a wonderful chapter by Justin Nolan in here about Piney Woods Barbecue in South Arkansas near El Dorado in northern Louisiana. And what he found was in the western part of that region, they tended more toward Texas barbecue, and in the eastern part, they tended more towards Delta-style barbecue. So actually, I do find beef in particular areas of Arkansas. I think Tennessee going eastward, because I think, in my opinion, Arkansas is sort of a transitional state for barbecue, right? There's a fair amount of diversity here, and I think it's wonderful. But basically from Tennessee east, it's all pork. Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and then there's Texas. But I think you do find a little more diversity here in Arkansas. You can definitely find some beef if you go looking for it. My mom tends to like it. I'm not a big fan, but I like beef brisket. I just don't consider it barbecue. I probably ruffled some feathers on that one. People are very passionate about it. I'm not in Texas, at least. Let's put it that way.
I was intrigued by your discussion of the hogs in the orchard, and I was raised hearing this phrase, it would either be wild as or crazy as peach orchard boar. And I was wondering if you could verify that term, because you never heard wild or crazy as an apple orchard boar. So my assumption was it had to do with the digestive challenge of the pit. I was wondering if you could verify that.
Well, that's a term that I hope to adopt in my vernacular. I've never heard that before. It was wild as a peach orchard boar. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I will say that Arkansas was one of probably the leading apple producer in the nation around the turn of the 20th century, up until the 1930s. And there are still some orchards up in northwest Arkansas around Springdale and Fayetteville, but by and large, orchards have fallen out of favor in Arkansas, at least the Ozarks where I've studied. There are still more in southern Appalachia, and they still produce more. So it could also be, but there are more peaches in Arkansas and the Ozarks than there are in Appalachia. So it just could be that they also, maybe in the generation before you, there's just a wider prevalence of peach orchards versus apple orchards. That's just a guess, but that's a great saying. I like that. Somebody should put that in a book. I might if you don't beat me to it.
Well, thank all you for coming out this afternoon. Thank you so much for coming back to your adopted state. And if you do want, you can come and chat a little bit more about some barbecue, and we appreciate it.
All right.